Russia, Ukraine. And what do you think is the outcome of this might be? Do you believe that it's going to end in 1 year, 10 years? Do you believe it's going to be a nuclear exchange? Do you believe our President Biden would one day wake up and decide to wrap it up, just like Afghanistan was wrapped up? And if you were advisor to the Biden administration, looking, let's say, pretend that they're looking for the ramp off of this, what would you advise on how to make sure to de-escalate this? Loaded question, but just kind of along the lines of the potential outcomes, the future, the time frame, and what do you think needs to be done if we wanted to wrap this up?
There's an old saying that you can't solve a problem unless you first accurately define it. Because if you don't define the problem properly, what you're claiming to solve isn't the problem, it's something else, and we're going on. So we have to be careful to understand how we got to where we are. The common narrative today is that this was an unprovoked act of aggression on the part of Russia against Ukraine. But that's just simply false. The fact of the matter is the United States and NATO have been plotting against Russia since the collapse of the Soviet Union. If you recall, Mikhail Gorbachev, when the Berlin Wall went down, was concerned about the potential reunification of Germany. Russia had 400,000 troops stationed in East Germany. People tend to forget that Germany lost World War II. It was Nazi Germany, and they were occupied for a reason. And there was no peace treaty. There had been no peace treaty because the United States wouldn't allow there to be a peace treaty. We wanted to split up into West and East and all this. But now the walls come down. The Germans want to be reunited. And Gorbachev recognized the historical inevitability of that. But he was concerned because West Germany was a member of NATO. And if Germany unites, would NATO expand into East Germany? And that would be a threat against Poland, against everybody else. And so Gorbachev and his and Shevardnadze, his foreign minister, met with James Baker and other NATO leaders. And James Baker wrote a memorandum after his meeting that said he had promised Gorbachev that NATO would not expand 1 inch eastward, that NATO forces in Germany would never go into East Germany. And by extension, that meant that NATO wasn't going to expand into the former Warsaw Pact nations as well. When Baker came back and briefed this to the National Security Council and the interagency community here in the United States, they basically laughed him down and said, no, boss, we're going to expand NATO. You see, NATO is going to be used as a tool to contain Russia, to ensure Russia never again rises up to challenge us in a way that the Soviet Union did. So anybody who lived through Russia in the 1990s understands how horrible it was. It was literally
I did. Yep.
Very difficult time. The economy was collapsed. The government was corrupt, inefficient. The oligarchs took over. They were robbing Russia blind. It was just a very, very dark time. And that made us happy. You see, because Russia was weak. Russia was, neutered. We were exploiting their economy. We're dominating them politically. Anybody who says the 1990s was the age of democracy in Russia doesn't know what they're talking about. I only have to point them to October 1993, when Yeltsin put tanks on the streets in Moscow to fire on the Russian parliament. Democracies don't have executives using tanks to fire on the legislative branch. Not a democracy. Or 1996, how we talk about 2016, how the Russians were seeking to steal the election. We now know that that's a lie, but one thing that's not a lie is 2016, I said 1996 in Russia, we stole an election for Yeltsin. He would not have won re-election in 1996. We stole it. We admit it. We put it on Time magazine and bragged about it. That's how much we dominated Russia. That was our goal. When Yeltsin resigned at the end of 1999, he's surrounded by what they called the family. And not only was it his family, his daughter, his son-in-law, but there was a whole host of people who were like wolves around a sheep, waiting for the sheep to die so they could eat it. They're just all sitting there going, yes, one of us is going to be the leader to resume this corruption, this ineffective government, this horrible thing that the West loved. See, we loved Russia being corrupt. and weak and inefficient and inept and pathetic. We loved it. And so there's a whole bunch of people ready to do that. And I think Yeltsin realized that he had made a fundamental mistake. In fact, in his farewell address, he says, I have made mistakes. And you know how he rectified the mistake? He reached out and touched somebody that nobody had heard of before. Nobody thought he wasn't part of the family. He wasn't one of the wolves. He was the ultimate outsider. His name was Vladimir Putin, and he made him president in his stead. Now, the United States looked at that. Bill Clinton went, that's okay. Putin will never get elected in the next election in March of 2000 because we Americans, we control everything. We'll make sure he doesn't get elected. We'll put our person in. Putin won the election. And Putin never played that game. And the United States has hated Putin ever since because Putin has decided that Russia is going to stand up back on its feet. Russia is going to rebuild. Russia is going to become the nation it deserves to be. Not just for the Russian people that are resident in the Russian Federation, but as he said in 2005, for all Russians, meaning that the Russian nation is composed of not just people who reside in, but he said the greatest tragedy of the last century, one of the greatest tragedies of the last century was the collapse of the Soviet Union. Why? Because overnight, tens of millions of Russians became homeless, no home, no capital, nothing. They were left on their own. And he said, that cannot happen. We must protect the Russian people. And he began a policy of doing just that. We did not like this. We opposed it. We tried to destroy Russia through the Chechen conflict. A lot of people don't understand what happened during the Second Chechen War, where the United States poured in millions of dollars to fund the Chechen opposition. And we brought in foreign fighters, jihadists, to radicalize the Chechen population because our goal was to get Chechnya to break away from Russia, thereby setting in motion potential other nations to break away, not only the Northern Caucasus, but Bashkiria, Udmurtia, Tataria, all these other nations. We wanted them to break up, we wanted to dismember Russia. That was our objective. And Putin didn't let it happen. We hate Vladimir Putin, and we've hated him ever since. And so how did we manifest that hate? Well, in 2008, an interesting thing, then ambassador to Russia, William Burns, wrote a memorandum called Niet means Niet, no means no. And he said, if we invite Ukraine into NATO, it will cross a red line that would inevitably lead to Russia's military intervention in Ukraine and probably Ukraine losing the Donbass and Crimea. 2008, we knew this. That was written in April. In November, we invited Ukraine to join NATO. What does that tell you? That we knew by doing this, we were setting in motion a sequence of events that would, as Ambassador Burns said, lead to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We wanted Russia to invade Ukraine. That was our entire policy objective in 2008. In 2014, we overthrew the constitutionally elected government of Viktor Yanukovych. When I say we, understand Victoria Nuland is on a phone call talking about her boy Yatsenko.
Yes.
This is before Yanukovych is released, and she's already handpicked the future leader of Ukraine, an American person, somebody we picked. It's just humiliating for Ukraine to understand what we did to you. And then in the conflicts that emerged from that, in August and September in 2014, the Ukrainian army got surrounded in Donetsk, north of the capital city of Donetsk. I can't remember the exact town, the name of it, but they were surrounded, 10,000 of them, and they were going to die. The Russians haven't admitted it, but I think the evidence is clear that Russian troops had intervened and helped the local militias surround the Ukrainians, and they were going to kill them all. This would have radically changed everything. It would have meant that the new government of Yatsenko and forget who was the president at the time.
Yatsenyuk and Poroshenko, you mean the next one? Or
Poroshenko became the president after that, but Yatsenyuk maybe. But it means that they were going to collapse.
Klitschko was the mayor. Yeah, Klitschko was the Kiev
mayor.
mayor.
Yeah. So, but Germany and France intervened through what they call the Normandy format. And they said, let's do something called the Minsk Accords. We want a ceasefire. We want a path towards peace. Putin could have destroyed the Ukrainian army, but he chose peace. He said, okay, I'll sign up for this. So the Russians have always been looking for a peaceful outcome. But now we have the confessions of Poroshenko, Merkel, and Hollande, the French president, the three premier people who say Minsk was always a sham. We never intended to make it happen. We're buying time so that NATO could rebuild the Ukrainian army for what purpose? To launch offensive operations to capture all of the Donbass and retake Crimea, which Russia annexed in April of 2014, basically to go to war with Russia. That was the purpose. Designed in 2014, they spent 8 years preparing this military. The United States built a military training facility in Western Ukraine that every 55 days trained 1 battalion of Ukrainian troops to NATO standards for the sole purpose of killing Russians in eastern Ukraine. Over 30,000 Ukrainian troops were trained by the United States. Another 60,000 were trained by other NATO forces. 90,000 Ukrainian forces ready to attack the Donbass and Crimea. This is why Russia intervened. It is literally collective self-defense, preemptive collective self-defense. This is the war that was started. And the reason why I bring that up is your question was, how do we solve this problem? Well, the problem must be defined as a war started by the West. A war started by the West. All right. So if I'm advising Biden, I would say we have to acknowledge that we have failed, that this is not going to succeed, that Russia is going to win. We have to acknowledge that. So now the question is, how do we mitigate the consequences of a Russian victory? The first thing is to put on our humanitarian hat. We have to understand, and I think everybody needs to understand this, that every single Ukrainian soldier that has died, every single Ukrainian civilian that has died, every building that's been destroyed, every electrical generation capability has been destroyed, it's the fault of the United States, Germany, France, and NATO. They are 100% to blame. Russia is blameless in all of this. So we have to say, if we care about Ukrainian people, we must make suffering stop. And the only way you can make the suffering stop is to end this conflict on terms that Russia will accept. Russia is the only voice that counts right now, but we're not going to do that. So what's that tell you? We don't care about Ukraine. We are willing to sacrifice Ukraine to achieve our objectives, but our objectives are unattainable. And the irony of this is, I mean, this is sort of funny, but it's not, because we're talking about the tragedy of the Ukraine conflict. But I was put on a list. There was a group created, the Center for the Countering of Disinformation, which works underneath President Zelensky. And the job is to identify people out there who are saying things that run counter to the narrative being pushed by Kiev. So I'm on that list. I feature prominently. I am an information terrorist, a Russian propagandist. I am a war criminal who should be arrested and prosecuted for this. My number one crime, and this is where I have to chuckle, my number one crime was that I said that the Ukrainian-Russian conflict was a proxy war between NATO and Russia. I said this back in March. I've been saying it ever since. Interestingly, earlier this year, the Ukrainian defense minister has come out and said the Ukrainian-Russian conflict is a proxy war between NATO and Russia, and that it's the Ukrainian forces that are sacrificing their blood, and NATO must provide the equipment. Exactly what I said. Now, I'm waiting for his name to appear next to mine on this list, but it won't. This shows you the absurdity of what's going on right now, where the narrative is so far removed from reality. But if America is going to solve this problem, we have to stop. One of the best ways to put out a fire is to deny fuel to the fire. If you remove fuel from the fire, nothing burns, the fire goes out. The fuel for this fire is the equipment we're providing Ukraine. If we stop providing that equipment, the fire would go out because Ukraine couldn't continue to resist. Russia would prevail. Ukraine's already lost 20% of its territory. It will never get this territory back. I ask people to familiarize themselves with the Russian Constitution, Article 65, that talks about the inviolability of Mother Russia. Once something is brought into Mother Russia, it is Mother Russia forever. It's not going to be traded away. So all this Ukrainian hope, and this is where it gets serious, because Ukrainians are saying we need this weaponry so that we can launch an attack to liberate the Donbass, to liberate Kherson, Zaporizhia, and liberate Crimea. But what they're saying is to strip away Mother Russia. Now, I know the Ukrainians don't view it as Mother Russia, but the Russians do. And as soon as Russia's nuclear doctrine is quite simple. If you use nuclear weapons against us, the dead hand, we kill everything. That's Vidanya. But the other thing they say is if you threaten the existential survival of Russia with conventional military power, we will have to use nuclear weapons to resolve that issue. So if NATO was successful in building a Ukrainian army that was capable of doing what the Ukrainian leadership says it wants to do, that is by definition an existential threat to the survival of the Russian state, and Russia will use nuclear weapons to stop it. This is a statement of fact. So I would tell the president that we have to stop this mad rush towards nuclear annihilation. That what we need to do is go back to basic principles. We are in danger if we continue this policy of not only being humiliated in Ukraine like we were in Afghanistan and in Iraq, but of destroying that which we claim to be supporting, NATO. Right now, because of the United States, Europe has embarked on a policy of sanctioning Russia, especially Russian energy, that's backfired. It's not the Russian economy that is suffering. It is the European economy that's suffering. And there's already deep fractures within the European economy about this. Even France and Germany now are starting to question the United States policy, noting that they denied them access to cheap Russian gas, meanwhile selling them liquid natural gas at exorbitant prices that are causing industries to shut down and people not be able to pay their bills. So there's already anger there. Now the United States is asking them to empty their arsenals and turn this weaponry over to Ukraine at a time when, and here's the unintended consequence. General Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, in May traveled to Kiev and then came, I think, Warsaw, and he gave a speech where he said the goal and objective is to weaken Russia. Basically, we're using Ukraine to weaken Russia. Hey, General, pro tip, it didn't work. You see, Russia's stronger today than it was on February 24th of last year. Russian military on February 24th was in a peacetime composition. And there were a lot of inefficiencies, a lot of inadequacies. The command structure wasn't perfect. The mobilization structure wasn't perfect. There was just a lot wrong with it. And these flaws became exposed when Russia moved into Ukraine. The Russians have learned a lot of mistakes. I bring us to American history. In 1943 or 1942, I'm sorry, we deployed to North Africa to fight the Germans there. And there's a famous battle called Kasserine Pass. And the 2nd U.S. Army Corps fought the Germans at the Battle of Kasserine Pass, El Guitar, and we were beat badly, humiliating. Why? Because the American military was poorly organized, poorly led, poorly equipped, had bad tactics and everything. And we went to battle and we got beat. But then another general came in named George Patton, who learned the lessons of Kasserine Pass, reinvigorated the army, and then went out and beat the Germans. And then in 1943, continued to beat them in Sicily. And in 1944, we started beating them in Italy and in France. And we turned this volunteer army of Americans, 12 million strong, who were a bunch of guys who didn't want to be in the military, into hardened killers, guys who lived to kill Nazis, recognizing that the only way they got to go home was to kill as many Nazis as possible. And we became the best military in the world, killing people. The Russian military that started the invasion in or whatever you call it, special military operation, the military operation against Ukraine, was not the best army in the world. It actually was pretty inept. It made a lot of mistakes. They had some good equipment, they had good leaders, good fighters, but they were stumbling all around. It wasn't a perfectly executed plan. They've mobilized 300,000 men. These are men who were taken from their homes, men who were taken from their wives, taken from their daughters, their sons. They were, other people's sons, taken from their parents, taken from their jobs, taken from their communities. They had already served their country and they were done with serving their country, but called upon to serve their country again. These guys are coming into a Russian military that has learned all the mistakes of the past, has made changes, and is becoming far more efficient, far more deadly. And these guys are going to become the most efficient killers of Ukrainians in the world. Nazis, the Azov, Idar, Kraken,
Tornado, yeah.
all the Tornado, all these other units, they're all going to die. Why? Because these guys know the only way they get home by killing every Ukrainian bearing arms in front of them. And so what's about to happen is a nightmare for Ukraine, because Ukraine is about to be overwhelmed with the most efficient killing machine in the world today, and that's the Russian army. They are ready, they are willing, they are able, and they're going to do it. This is what I would tell the president. Our plan has backfired. We have failed. Russians are stronger than ever. It's not just what they're doing in the special military operation, but thanks to the idiocy of our policy, Russia is expanding its military to 1.5 million. It's not just building a larger military. Their defense industry is actually working right now full time to not only supply the special military operation with all of the weapons and ammunition it needs, equip this new expanded military. What is our defense industry doing? Nothing. The same production schedule that we had during peacetime. The Russians are on a near wartime footing. We're not. Mr. President, we have lost, and we have to cut our losses. We have to get out of this and see if we can regroup. And our regrouping can't be to continue the failed policy of trying to destroy Russia. Russia ain't never going to be destroyed right now. We missed our opportunity. What we have to do is convince Russia that it's in their best interest to live in peaceful coexistence with us. We don't want Russia on a war footing. We want Russia to be a nation that we can peacefully coexist. This means we have to work with the Europeans to repair relations with the Russians. That's what I would recommend. It's not going to happen because too many people have a vested interest in continuing this. One of the things I learned as an officer, junior officer, is it doesn't matter if you're right. When you're standing in front of the general and explaining, you're losing. When you're explaining, you're losing. And no American politician wants to now go out and explain to the American people why decades-long Russophobia is wrong. How do we tell the American people to hate Russians one day, but suddenly we want to be friends with them the next day? It's a very difficult thing to do. So the solution is not going to come from the Biden administration. What we need right now are responsible military leaders who keep this from stumbling into a war and hope that we can elect a new president in 2024 that will free himself of this Russophobic tendencies, trends, and begin to work not to confront Russia, but to peacefully coexist with Russia, inclusive, hopefully, of arms control. But even if we can't get arms control, at least not trying to destroy Russia by accumulating conventional military power. Russia's beaten us. Their army is big. Their army is capable. It's ready to fight. We're getting ready to pour in a huge shopping list of equipment into Ukraine. People need to understand that all we're doing is guaranteeing the deaths of tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers. That's all we've accomplished here. We may kill thousands of Russians in the process, but they're going to slaughter the Ukrainians. Russia will not lose this war because Russia cannot lose this war.
Scott, very well explained. Thank you. I think a lot of American people do not understand that. They think about, oh, Russia is going to use nuclear weapons against Ukraine. No, Russia explicitly said that if it ever has to use nuclear weapons, that will be used against NATO countries.
Yep.
So people here grilling hot dogs and drinking beer thinking, oh, those Russians and Ukrainians, if something happens, it's going to be them. No, it's going to be us. And people in Europe and German bases at Ramstein, where they're meeting now, and going to meet, I believe, on the 20th or so, deciding to provide Ukraine with more weapons, which you so rightly mentioned, do nothing but kill more Ukrainians. While we American people are told that we are saving Ukraine, nothing could be further from the truth. We are destroying Ukraine. We were the ones with Obama administration and Biden vice president at the time, Victoria Nuland, who orchestrated with EU-backed, US-backed coup that removed the democratically elected president of Ukraine in 2014 and set Ukraine on the path of destruction when it started to bomb its own citizens in eastern Ukraine. And now that those citizens asked Russia for military assistance under, I believe you said, Article 51 of collective self-defense, and Russian parliament voted to approve providing that military assistance, and Russian army came into Donbass area, and this just mushrooms in a bigger war, all could have been avoided if our favorite politicians' foreign policy wouldn't be running around changing regimes, but would be actually doing something productive and something to accomplish the stability or security framework in the world. But so far, it almost seems like we're coming back to what you said in the beginning. Did we stop being adult in the room? I mean, what's going on with us, the United States? And I am, as American citizen, as somebody who loves America, I would like to see us be better or do better. I would like this to show responsibility and not to put the world on the brink of nuclear war over some ambitions of some dinosaur political fossil politicians that don't know any better than, let's say, the Zbigniew Brzezinski's book, The Grand Chessboard, that refers to America has to be this hegemon and boss everybody around. We obviously see this doesn't work. Whether Biden likes to admit it or not, with his "we are the new world order and I am a leader of new world," well, newsflash, Mr. Biden, Putin and President the Chairman Xi just told you the world's not longer going to be a unipolar world. You either adapt or you do what? Or you're going to bring us to the nuclear war to assert your hegemony because you don't see the reality on the ground, and you need to kill more Ukrainians because you just can't have enough of your donors make more money off of those weapons. I don't understand that. And you're willing, as Mr. Biden, our president, and his surrounding, put our American people lives at stake to doing so, to promote their ideas of a yesteryear, of the past, of something that doesn't work anymore. The world reality has changed. I'm just sitting all of this and thinking, American people do not understand that if there was a nuclear weapons to be used, Russia is not going to use them against Ukraine.
Nope,
it's going to be using against everybody
Paris.
who doesn't think that they're going to come their way.
Yeah, Paris, Rome, London, Berlin, Brussels, Madrid, you name it, it'll disappear. That's just the reality of it. You know, you talk about Brzezinski's book, The American Chess Board. What a stupid title. Want to know why?
Grand chessboard or something along those lines.
Right, but who's the best? Yeah. What's the nation that produces the best chess players in the world?
Russia. Yay,
oh yeah.
Ding,
So
ding, ding.
do you really want to play chess against the Russians? And then we go to China, and they don't play chess; they play Chinese checkers. So the Chinese are playing a completely different game than the one Brzezinski's talking about. It's just stupid. It shows the hubris of Americans to think that we get to dictate outcomes. The rest of the world, as I said before, they've left mommy's basement. They're out. They have jobs. They're fully employed. They're making more money than their parents. They have better cars than their parents. They have a better lifestyle than their parents. And their parents is America. And America's sitting there saying, no. You must do what mommy says. You must do what daddy says. And they're saying, nah, boss, we're doing our own thing, which is cute until you bring in nuclear weapons. And then the world ends. And but Biden, I don't know if you know my history with Joe Biden, but we go back a long time, and we actually had a big famous fight on the floor.
I watched a little video because YouTube sent me that suggested video when Scott Ritter sits facing Mr. Biden, the senator. Yes. It was a quick exchange where I think he displayed himself in the most disgraceful manner.
Yeah, that's true.
As no American should ever be caught in the situation on his side, on the side of how he behaved himself being a United States senator. I thought it was despicable and disgraceful.
No, but that's who he is. I mean, we need to understand who we elected. That's who we elected. This man, this liar, this horrific human being. But he ran on a platform. And I told everybody, don't believe anything. Remember, he's a plagiarist. He's an admitted plagiarist. He lies about his record, his background, his education. He can't tell the truth about anything. It's all about Joe Biden, the narcissist. And so he runs on a platform and he says, I want to return America's nuclear policy to the sole purpose doctrine, meaning the sole purpose of American nuclear weapons is to defend against a nuclear attack, that we will not use nuclear weapons unless we are attacked with nuclear weapons. Okay, that would be nice, Joe. If you do that, maybe I'll change my mind about you. But in October of last year, he published the National Security Strategy of the United States, inclusive of the updated nuclear posture review. And we didn't see sole purpose. What we saw is a continuation of nuclear posture began under George W. Bush, post 9/11 world, where America says we can use nuclear weapons preemptively in a non-nuclear scenario, meaning we're not waiting for somebody to attack or somebody with nuclear weapons. At any time we decide we need to, whether it's a cyber attack, whether you blinked at us wrong, whether you wore the wrong color lipstick or something, we get to nuke you because we're America, we're the superpower, we get to do what we want. Joe Biden couldn't change America's addiction to nuclear weapons. What makes us believe that Joe Biden can control this? We need a commander in chief that has the ability, the capacity to impose his will on the nuclear establishment to keep them from inching us towards nuclear conflict and instead move us away and disarm. This is absolutely imperative. We have to move back and disarm. And if we don't have that kind of leader, you and I are having this conversation today. We may not be having this conversation next year because we may not be here. And this is what all those beer drinking, hot dog eating Americans need to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott, real quick, what about China, Taiwan? I watched some of your interviews. I think you said that China was going to take the Taiwan before the end of this year. I am waiting. What do you think changed?
Well, the big thing
Did
that
they
changed
step
was
back? And what do you think?
there was an election in Taiwan in November, and the Taiwanese president overplayed her hand. See, the election she had wasn't for her. It was sort of the equivalent of midterm elections for Taiwan, where they elect city mayors, council members, and all this stuff. And normally, national security and foreign policy doesn't factor into this. And had she just let the election run its course, her party probably would have won sufficient seats to maintain, a superiority, a majority. But instead, she tried to overplay her hand, and she brought in her cross-straits policy, trying to promote a path towards independence, a path towards confrontation, a path towards conflict, which is how the United States was pushing. Had she won that election, China would probably have invaded Taiwan by now, but she lost. The Kuomintang, the opposition party, was able to say no, and instead they won the election. Now, she's still president, but she had to resign as the head of her party and to put Taiwan into a state of flux until 2024. So right now, even though the United States will continue to push Taiwan in this direction, there is no political consensus in Taiwan right now to continue a cross-straits policy with China that could lead to the conditions under which China would invade. Had she won that election, I'm convinced China would have invaded by now, but we were saved literally by the Kuomintang party and her overreach. And as a result, I think we have 2 years grace until 2024 before this problem manifests itself in a way that creates war. And hopefully in that time, one, will get a new president here in the United States that seeks not to have war with China. Two, the Taiwanese people will wake up to new realities that make it more possible for them to accept, the Chinese offer of one nation, two systems. I mean, because all China's saying is literally all we need you to do is say we are part of China, and then you get to live your life exactly as you live it right now. We take down your flag, we put up our flag, and that's it. But nope, they want independence. They want, and China will never allow that. But that election is what changed everything.
Do you, Scott, see what's happening with Japan? It just recently signed a pact with Great Britain, I believe, the first European country, as far as them mutually allow each other to place the troops on each other's soil, supposedly to deter China. I mean, Japan used to be in charge of Taiwan or own Taiwan at one point. Do you believe Japan is stepping away from being this pacifist constitution after World War II commitment and now trying to become more militarized? And should we be worried about Japan?
Well, we could, but let me put it this way. I met with my neighbor yesterday and we signed an agreement about which one of us would be first on Mars. Do you understand how useless that agreement is?
Okay,
it means nothing. So you say Japan signed an agreement with Great Britain about putting troops on their soil. I don't think Japan's going to be sending any troops over to Great Britain anytime soon. What this is about putting British Marines, allowing to jointly train with the Japanese forces in the There's an island chain that's contested.
Uh-huh.
But let me put it this way. They just played the World Cup this past summer. Very good games. Viva Argentina. But the stadiums that they built there, you could put the entire British Army in one of those stadiums and still have 40,000 empty seats.
I see.
All right, so are we really worried about the British saying they're going to come? It's like me signing an agreement about going to Mars. The British have no military capacity to project power into the Japanese sphere of influence. It's purely a political thing, but it comes down to what you're saying. It does represent a mindset on the part of Japan that is departing from its post-World War II constitutional restrictions regarding an offensive army. The Japanese military is called the Japanese Self-Defense Force. It's not supposed to be an army capable of projecting power, but now we have a new generation of militarist political leaders in Japan who seek to break away from that, and they're being pushed in that direction by Great Britain, the United States, and Australia. And this is dangerous. Not because the Japanese are ever going to become a global superpower again. They're not. But what it does is create the potential for a conflict between Japan and Russia over these disputed islands.
Islands, yes.
I think the big controlling factor here is that Japan's economy cannot live without Russian gas. And the Japanese are looking at Europe and seeing what happened to the European economy. And the Japanese understand that they are a little island nation that is totally dependent upon imports, and that Russia is becoming increasingly aligned with China. And that if Japan picks a fight with Russia, they'll be picking a fight with China. And if China wants to, they can shut off through the South China Sea. Remember all those nice little islands that China fortified? When China wants to, they can shut it down and nothing gets to Japan, and the Japanese economy disappears. And the Japanese have to wake up to this reality that the United States is no longer the cavalry that's going to ride to their rescue. That because of advanced weaponry, both possessed by both Russia and China, the U.S. Navy, the fleet that used to be the mainstay of our Pacific presence, is now little more than mobile coffins. That an aircraft carrier will be hit by a Russian or Chinese missile and sunk before it can intervene effectively on behalf of Japan, South Korea, or Taiwan. This is the new reality. And the Japanese, I believe, are eventually going to wake up to this. They already got a hint about it when Russia started renegotiating contracts about the production of gas on Sakhalin Island. And the Japanese went, whoa, wait a minute. We don't want to go that route because if they lose that, their economy tanks. So I think the Japanese will wake up. Look, what they did with the British symbolically is important. In terms of real military capability, as I said, you can take a World Cup soccer stadium, fill it with the totality of the British Army, and still have tens of thousands of empty seats. That's how pathetic Britain is today in terms of military power.
Do you, Scott, believe NATO is going to survive the war in Ukraine?
Yes, but they may not survive the post-war period. I think the war in Ukraine is going to create a deep divide in Europe between old Europe, primarily France, Germany, Italy, and others, who are going to recognize that they were used by the United States to pursue American security policy interests to the detriment of their own economy and their national security. You already hear talk from Emmanuel Macron and even the Germans now about the necessity of a European alliance that is free of American influence, separate from NATO. Now, you have New Europe, which is the Baltics, Poland, Czech Republic, Romania, and those countries who, no, they want to be part of America. They want to be part of this new Eastern bulwark against Russia. But that won't work unless they have all of NATO. And I think you're going to see this divide grow and grow and grow. And eventually, I think you're going to see NATO collapse in its own ineptitude and irrelevance.
You think Russia is waiting for NATO to collapse?
No, Russia doesn't care about NATO anymore.
Okay.
NATO is pathetic. NATO is weak. NATO is nothing. And you see that in the attitude of all the Russians, from Lavrov to Putin. They're just like, we don't care. We literally don't care. I mean, you had Stoltenberg in Madrid last June talking about NATO building 300,000 man rapid reaction force. Where is it, Jan? Where is it? It doesn't exist except in your own mind, your own imagination. Nobody's ready for it. Nobody's funding it. It's not there. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin signed an order to expand the Russian military to 1.5 million, and it's happening as we speak. They're building the equipment. They're finding the men. They're building the contract vehicles. Russia's far ahead of NATO. NATO will never catch up, and eventually Europe will realize that that's a race they just don't want to run. They don't. Their economies are junked right now. You really can't talk about allocating hundreds of billions of euros to build a military when your people are unemployed, your factories are shut down, your economy is not just in a recession, but maybe in a depression. So I think, eventually this thing we call NATO, this artifice, this artifact from World War II and the Cold War, it has no legitimate reason to exist. And sooner or later, many European countries are going to recognize that. And when that happens, it's the end of NATO.
It's the end of it. Well, Scott, there is so much more I would like to ask you, but we'll save it for another time. I hope there will be another time, right?
Absolutely. Anytime you want, reach out, and I'll be more than happy to do it.
Thank you very much, Scott. I appreciate it. And thank you very much for your time. I again encourage everybody to, could you please lift up your cup, Scott, to buy and read Scott's book, Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika. What's the underneath title, Scott, to that?
Arms Control and the End of the Soviet Union.
Yes. And where can people find your book, Scott?
Well, they can find it. They can go to the publisher's page, Clarity Press, and search it there, Barnes and Nobles, Amazon, or they can go to my website, which is scottritterextra.com, where we have a link to the book. And you can also get access to all the articles I write and all the podcasts I do. For instance, when you send me a link to this podcast, I'll post it on scottritterextra.com so everybody has a chance to view it. So that
would be excellent. That would be excellent, Scott. It is my honor and privilege to have sit down with Scott Ritter today with the discussion regarding his wonderful books. Scott is a writer. Please check out other books that he's written. I personally have one here that I intend to read soon. And it says The Endgame. It's a great name for the book. I love it. And there is some other ones that I would like to also read. Thank you very much, Scott. And I hope we'll do it again.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, and we will definitely do it again.
Now I can stop it, Scott. I hope I find where to stop it. And again, forgive me for my first time here.
No, you did very well. You did very well.
I'm trying to find where is the stop recording. Pause, stop recording.